The further away I am from the human race, the better I feel.
People do too much. They say too much. Just sleep all day long and forget the day.
To me, once a person enters the door, the first thing I think of is getting rid of them.
I love being alone. It's not solitary at all. I want to be solitary. It's great. The best thing in the world is to get away from other people. It's glorious. I just don't like people. I only like myself. There's no pain, no struggle. It's great. It's easy. It's beautiful.
When somebody even brushes against me with an elbow in a crowd, I react. I do not like the human race.
I don't want to save the world. I don't even want to save me. How do you know that you're the one? You don't know. It's a shot in the dark. You take it, or you become a normal, civilized person from 8 to 5. Get married, have children, Christmas together. Here comes Grandma. Hi, Grandma, come on in. How are you? You know, shit, I couldn't take that. I'd rather murder myself. There's nothing left to say. We're so fucking boring. Let it die, I say. Let there be a new beginning. It's awful. Good night.
Charles Bukowski is likely America's most famous poet. He wrote thousands of poems, hundreds of short stories, over 60 novels, and has sold millions and millions of books in more than a dozen languages. This is the kind of commercial success that's practically unheard of in American poetry. Perhaps what sets Bukowski apart from other esteemed writers is that he represents the average man. Here was a guy with a blemished face, a beer belly, and greasy hair, who spent most of his life working a day job he hated, arguing with a girlfriend, drinking beer and wine, and then writing stories at night. Most nights he'd only sleep a few hours, wake up, and do it all over again the next day. Bukowski's writing isn't pretentious. It's very easy to understand. And it's funny too. He writes about the ridiculousness of it all, of being a person, of the things you have to do to survive in society as a human. He details countless hangovers, gambling at the horse track, sleeping with prostitutes, and countless other bad decisions. He never sugarcoated any topic. He told it like he saw it without censoring himself in any way. And because of this, he's a very polarizing figure. To some, he's a cult hero, and to others, he's a misogynistic lowlife. Many famous writers enjoy a brief revival when they die and then sink into obscurity, but since Bukowski's death in 1994, his posthumous legend continues to grow, thanks in large part to the internet. Today, there are hundreds of websites devoted to him, not just in America, but around the globe. And if you search his name on YouTube, there are countless videos and interviews involving him that have millions of views. His mainstream appeal is simply that he never belonged to the mainstream. He knew who he was, he didn't mold to outside expectations, and he wore his flaws openly. Bukowski said, quote, "Somebody once asked me what my theory of life was, and I said, don't try. That fits the writing too. I don't try, I just type. I'm like a spider spinning my web. It's all I can do."
I really don't want to do anything. I wake up in the morning, I just want to lay in bed 3 or 4 more hours. Even going to the typewriter, as I walk toward it, I realize I must be a writer because, I made money at it. I don't even like the looks of the typewriter. Sometimes I stay away from it for days because it seems like jobs I used to have. The minute I sit down to the damn thing, I have a few bottles of wine, a half a bottle of wine, the thing starts humming, and the words start popping up. Like popcorn kernels.
Although he would never admit it, Charles was extremely ambitious and hardworking, and has over 60 books to account for it. Bukowski wasn't a morally outstanding individual, and he treated a lot of people in his life poorly because he wasn't concerned with anything beyond what he was, and he didn't need you to agree with him. His art was simply about putting down on paper what he had seen through his own eyes. His pain and his laughter. Nothing more, nothing less. Henry Charles Bukowski was born on August 16, 1920, in a small town in Germany called Andernach. His mother, Katharina, was German, and his father, Henry, was born in Pasadena, California, to two German parents. During World War I, Henry was an American soldier who went to Europe to fight the Germans. After the war, he stayed in Germany because he met Katharina. She was 8 months pregnant with Charles when they got married. In 1923, when Charles was 3 years old, his parents moved to Los Angeles. Henry became a building contractor in LA and made a decent living and bought a respectable house in a respectable neighborhood. But then the Great Depression hit, which shadowed Bukowski's entire adolescence because his father was often unemployed and took his frustrations out on him. Because of this, Bukowski referred to his childhood as a horror story. In his autobiographical novel, Ham on Rye, which focuses on his early years, Charles recalled frequent abuses from his father, both physically and mentally, over the smallest offenses. For example, on Saturdays, while the rest of the kids on his street were out playing, his father would make him mow the lawn north and south, and then east and west. If he missed even one blade of grass, it meant getting a terrible beating. Bukowski wrote, quote, "My father walked to the center of the lawn, got down on his hands and knees and placed the side of his head low against the lawn, looking for any blade of grass that might be sticking up. He kept looking, twisting his neck, peering around. I could never get all the hairs. Almost every Saturday, I got a beating with the razor strap because my father found a hair."
The old man had a razor strap. He used to hang hair, and he'd just pick it off. Drop your pants and your shorts. I would stand about here, and he would begin. And I don't know how many lashes he'd give me. They'd be hard. 8, 10, 12, 14. Of course, you can't help screaming, especially when you're 6 years old, 7 years old. As I got around to be about 10 or 11 or 12, I screamed less. In fact, the last beating I got, I didn't scream at all. I just didn't make a sound. And I guess that terrorized him because that was the last one when I didn't make a sound.
Growing up, Bukowski didn't have any friends at school, but didn't want any. He felt better being alone. His natural shyness and introversion was heightened even more in his teen years when he got an extreme case of acne vulgaris. In Ham and Rye, he wrote, "Going into the 9th grade, I broke out with acne. Many of the guys had it, but not like mine. I was the worst case in town. I had pimples and boils all over my face, back, neck, and some on my chest. It happened just as I was beginning to be accepted as a tough guy and a leader. I was still tough, but it wasn't the same. I had to withdraw. I watched people from afar. It was like a stage play. Only they were on stage and I was an audience of one." End quote. The acne got so bad that he had to drop out of high school for several months to get treated at a hospital. It was in the hospital, in total isolation, when he first started writing at 13 years old. The combination of his disfigurement, along with his father's abuse, made him reflect on the pain and brutality of reality. Bukowski often cited his father as being a great literary teacher because he taught him the meaning of pain, pain without reason.
Beating me with that strap taught me something.
What did it teach you?
How to type. When you get the shit kicked out of you long enough and long enough and long enough, you will have a tendency to say what you really mean. In other words, you have all the pretense beat out of you. If you come through that and you still have something left, it can tend to be pretty real.
After Charles discovered writing, he became enamored with books. Between the ages of 15 and 24, he said he must have read an entire library. His favorite writers included John Fante, Henry Miller, James Thurber, and Ernest Hemingway. In Ham and Rye, he wrote, These men who had come into my life from nowhere were my only chance. They were the only voices that spoke to me. Reading was a joy. Words weren't dull. Words were things that could make your mind hum. If you read them and let yourself feel the magic, you could live without pain, with hope, no matter what happened to you." End quote. In high school, the only class he excelled at was creative writing, so when Charles enrolled at a local college, he chose to study journalism, but dropped out after only a few semesters because he found the classes useless and uninspiring. As a young man, Bukowski sought out conventional literary success. He'd write 3 to 5 short stories a week and send them to major publications like The Atlantic, The New Yorker, and Harper's, but they always got rejected. In the poem entitled "You Get So Alone at Times That It Just Makes Sense," he wrote, "When I was a starving writer, I used to read the major writers in the major magazines, and it made me feel very bad because being a student of the word and the way, I realized that they were faking it. I could sense each false emotion, each utter pretense. It made me feel that the editors had their heads up their asses, or were being politicized into publishing in groups of power. But I just kept writing and not eating very much, went down from 197 pounds to 137, but got very much practice typing and reading printed rejection slips. It was when I reached 137 pounds that I said to hell with it, quit typing, and concentrated on drinking and the streets and the ladies of the streets. At least those people didn't read Harper's, The Atlantic, or poetry."
It was always, for me, no place to go, no place to land, no chance ever. I didn't expect a chance. I didn't even want a chance. All I wanted to do was find a small room somewhere, find a bottle of wine, and start drinking. Maybe find a job for a week, get enough to drink 3 or 4 days and nights to feel free, away from jobs and things, and then return and try to do what I had to do. There wasn't much to do.
In December 1941, America entered World War II. However, Bukowski was rejected from the draft because a doctor deemed him psychologically unfit for combat. So instead of going to war, Charles went on a 10-year break from writing and bummed his way across the country with almost no money, staying in cheap temporary houses.
I used to pick where I was going. I would open a map, I would close my eyes and let the finger fall. It would say St. Louis, New Orleans, Savannah. So I'd get a bus ticket and go there, and I would always arrive in a town with very little in my pocket.
During these lost years, Charles rarely kept a job for more than a few weeks, and worked hundreds of low-level jobs like a dishwasher, truck driver, warehouse worker, gas station attendant, elevator operator, and janitor. Bukowski was convinced the 9-to-5 job was one of the greatest atrocities sprung upon mankind. In his novel Factotum, he wrote, "How in the hell could a man enjoy being awakened at 8:30 a.m. by an alarm clock, leap out of bed, dress, force feed, shit, piss, brush teeth and hair, and fight traffic to get to a place where essentially you made lots of money for somebody else, and were asked to be grateful for the opportunity to do so?"
Generally speaking, you're free till you're about 4 years old. And then 5 arrives. Then you go to grammar school, and then you start becoming demented and solved and orientated and shoved into areas. Then you work the 8-hour job with almost a feeling of goodness. I could not resign myself to the 8-hour job of nothingness. I could not understand it. That's all. So I bummed and I bummed and I bummed. It was one job after another. It was a park bench. It was a job in Dallas. It was a job in Atlanta. It was a job in Miami. Name the city somewhere south. I've been there.
For Bukowski, the one and only relief he could find from his banal existence was alcohol.
You work a goddamn lousy job, you know. You come home at night, you're tired. What are you going to do? Go to a movie? Hell no, you're gonna get a bottle of whiskey and drink it. I think a man can keep on drinking for centuries. He'll never die. I'm all for alcohol, I'll tell you. It's the thing.
Bukowski wasn't a casual drinker, he was a lifelong alcoholic. In Factotum, he wrote, "Frankly, I was horrified by life, at what a man had to do simply in order to eat, sleep, and keep himself clothed. So I stayed in bed and drank. When you drank, the world was still out there, but for the moment, it didn't have you by the throat."
If I hadn't been a drunkard, I probably would have committed suicide long ago. You know, working the factories, the 8-hour job, the slums, the streets.
The years Bukowski drifted around the United States were spent drinking, gambling, getting into bar fights, sleeping with prostitutes, and living as a bum. In part, this erratic behavior was a direct response to his disdain for typical American life. But more significantly, Bukowski thought in order to become a great writer, he needed to accumulate life experiences that would become material for his future writings. However, this reckless lifestyle caught up with him in 1955 when he ended up in a hospital with a bleeding ulcer and almost died. The doctor who finally discharged him said one more drink could kill him. Of course, Bukowski went back to the bottle, but after that day, he never drank quite as heavily again. This near-death experience also brought Charles back to the typewriter, and with a new spirit. Instead of writing short stories, he began writing poetry. Back in the 1940s and 50s, beat poetry was experiencing a renaissance in America, which birthed several underground magazines that were willing to publish racy work. So when Bukowski returned to his vocation, he found a bit of literary success for the first time. An alternative newspaper called Open City gave him a regular column called Notes of a Dirty Old Man, which became a cult success, and a few small publishers published collections of his poetry. These small magazines hardly paid, but they gave Bukowski a platform, and he started to build a reputation. However, since there was little to no money in poetry, Charles still had to work a regular day job to support his writing. So beginning in the early 50s, he began working for the United States Post Office. He worked for 3 years as a letter carrier, and then a decade as a letter filing clerk. Bukowski found the job mind-numbing, soul-crushing, and deeply unfulfilling. He'd usually have to work 11.5 hours a day, and even on his days off, he'd usually get called in.
Here it is. See what United States Post Office. Pure hell. Post office was a hard gig, you know. I'd work all night, 11 years clerking. Then I had to write. Get up and start drinking and writing, then go to work. The same thing, get up, drink and write.
Charles loathed everything about the post office job, but it gave him a steady income, a few hours to write, and most important, it gave him a connection with a wider audience than most of his fellow writers. Many beat writers couldn't relate to the common man because they didn't work jobs, but Bukowski did his entire life. He unquestionably lived a much darker, hungry, and desperate life than other writers, and it grounded his work. It wasn't academics who read him, it was average Joes. In his poem, entitled Termites of the Page, Bukowski wrote, "The problem that I've found with most poets that I've known is that they've never had an 8-hour job, and there is nothing that will put a person more in touch with the realities than an 8-hour job. Most of these poets that I've known have seemingly existed on air alone, but it hasn't been truly so. Behind them has been a family member, usually a wife or mother, supporting these souls, and so it's no wonder they have written so poorly. They've been protected against the actualities from the beginning, and they understand nothing." End quote. There's a good chance Bukowski would have spent his entire life juggling a day job with his writing had it not been for a man named John Martin. Martin was a publisher and avid reader, and when he came across Bukowski's work in 1970, he was convinced he discovered a major writer. He offered Bukowski $100 a month to quit his job and dedicate himself solely to writing, in return for the right to publish his work through Black Sparrow Press, where he'd pay the poet a quarter of everything he earned. Bukowski had no doubt about his decision, so at 50 years old he quit the post office and went to the typewriter. When Charles Bukowski became a full-time writer, his typical day looked something like this. He'd get up at noon, eat something, and then run to the horse track for the day. He'd bet on the horses and then come back to a girlfriend who'd cook him dinner. They'd talk a while, eat, have a few drinks, and when it got to be 9:30, he'd go upstairs and start typing. He'd place 2 six-packs and a bottle of wine next to him, turn on the classical music station, and type until he passed out at 1:30 or 2:30 at night. Alcohol was the fuel and often the subject of his poetic explosions, and he once told an interviewer that he's never written a poem when he was completely sober. To Charles, writing was less an art form and more a compulsion. He said, quote, "If I don't write for a week, I get sick. I can't walk, I get dizzy, I lay in bed, I puke. I've got to type. If you chop my hands off, I'd type with my feet." End quote. Bukowski's literary genius was in his ability to say a profound thing in a simple way.
The secret is writing down one simple line after another, and also inject a laughter through art, laughter through creation. Creation is not all that serious. When you write, your words must go like this. Bim, bim, bim. Bim, 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 bim. Each line must be full of a delicious little juice, flavor. They must be full of power. They must make you like to turn a page. Bim, bim, bim. Writing must never be boring. It must not bore the reader, the writer. It must not bore anybody. Writers put me to sleep. They always did. They always will.
Only 1 month after quitting the Postal Service, Bukowski called John Martin to tell him his first novel, entitled Post Office, was finished. When Martin asked how he completed an entire book in 1 month, Bukowski responded, "Fear." In Post Office and most of his accompanying novels, Bukowski's main character is his alter ego, Henry Chinaski, a heavy-drinking, womanizing gambler who stumbles between bars, odd jobs, and the typewriter. Since he almost always wrote in first person, the line between Chinaski the character and Bukowski the man is blurred. But this blurring is part of Bukowski's appeal. He combines the intimacy of a confessional poet with the larger-than-life bravado of a pulp fiction hero. And since he didn't write with his own name, it gave him freedom to stretch the truth in order to elevate his narrative. He said 93% of his work was autobiographical, and the rest was improved upon. In 1971, a year after receiving the original manuscript, John Martin published Post Office, and it sold an astounding 75,000 copies domestically and 500,000 additional copies worldwide. The original arrangement between Martin and Bukowski was a gamble for both parties, but it proved to be tremendously successful. Bukowski would go on to publish almost all his subsequent novels with Black Sparrow Press, and in the coming years his stipend rose from $100 to $7,000 a month, and he became a sort of rock star in the literature world.
All I wanted was to write well enough to pay the rent and have something to drink. I never really expected this kind of luck. I didn't expect it. I felt I could write good compared to the others, but I didn't expect anything to happen. You know, I wanted survival, that's all.
For the first time in his life, he had enough money to move into a comfortable home and buy himself a new BMW. He befriended celebrities like Sean Penn and Madonna, and became the subject of several biographies, documentaries, and a 1987 movie called Barfly, where a version of Bukowski is played by Mickey Rourke. Unfortunately, during his lifetime, Bukowski's work received little attention from academic critics in the United States. Despite having some fame at home, it didn't compare to the cult prestige he received in Europe. For example, when he visited Germany or France, it was a major cultural event. Newspapers ran front-page stories about him, fans followed him around as if he were a rock star, and one French television station used to run pre-recorded interviews of him as a way of ending the broadcast day. In his poem, entitled Huh, he wrote, "In Germany, France, Italy, I can walk down the streets and be followed by young men laughing, young ladies giggling, and old ladies turning their noses up. While in America, I'm just another tired old man, doing whatever tired old men do. Oh, this has its compensations. I can take my pants to the cleaners or stand in a supermarket line without any hubbub at all. The gods have allowed me a gentle anonymity. Yet, at times I do consider my overseas fame, and the only thing I can come up with is that I must have some great motherfucking translators. I must owe them the hair on my balls, or possibly my balls themselves." End quote. By the late 1970s, Bukowski was famous enough that he could make $200 in one evening by giving a live poetry reading where he always got drunk beforehand. A lot of people in the audience did the same thing, so his readings were always rowdy events filled with people screaming and yelling and jumping up and down.
Down here. Here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, Charles Bukowski.
Once I get out, I look at them. You know what I do? I take one tiny sweep with the second or third row and I see these faces. All of a sudden I feel completely superior.
This is Charles Bukowski.
Well, just let me sit here and drink beer. You want some poems? Beg me. It's not the large things that send a man to a madhouse. Death he's ready for, or murder, incest, robbery, fire, flood. No, it's a continuing series of small tragedies that send a man to the madhouse.
Having earned some fame, Charles got an abundance of female attention for the first time in his life, and his ensuing sexual encounters became the inspiration for his third novel entitled Women. The prominent woman featured in this book is Lydia Vance, a sculptor and single mom based on Linda King, who was Bukowski's real girlfriend for several years in the 70s. The pair got along because they loved alcohol and resented most people. However, this was an extremely toxic relationship because they both cheated on each other. When they finally split up for good in 1975, Chinaski tried to rebound by sleeping with basically any woman in front of him, but he never found any real satisfaction. In his novel Women, one of his short-term lovers named Iris asked him, quote,
"Why do you want so many women?"
"It was my childhood, you see, no love, no affection, and in my 20s and 30s there was also very little. I'm playing catch up.
Will you know when you've caught up?
The feeling I have is that I'll need at least one more lifetime.
You're so full of shit."
That's why I write. It's certainly possible to read his work and think that Bukowski only valued a woman based on her appearance and sexual performance, and many critics called him a misogynist.
In your stories, love is always a synonym for sexual intercourse.
Where do you
That's
get
not too romantic,
Where do you
is it?
get this crap, baby? Love is a dog from hell. That's all. It has its own agonies. It brings its own agonies with it.
This is where I wrote Women, yeah. This is where I did my research. And a lot of them used to sit on the couch. One morning I had 3 of them sitting on this couch. The mailman came by. He asked me the next day, "Hank, how do you do it? How do you get them?" So the problem is not how you get them, it's how you get rid of them.
They're interested in the evilness in my writing, if I can use that term, or the difference. And that's what attracts them. The moment they meet me, they try to change me into them, which is not evil, interesting, or anything at all. So I resent that, and I revolt to it, and then we get an unhappiness. But I don't come to them, they come to me.
Linda Lee was the last major romance of his life. He started seeing her in September 1976 after she approached him following a live reading. She convinced him to give up hard alcohol and improve his diet, and taught him about being vulnerable, which helped him grow as a person and as a writer. Today, most critics agree that his best work came later in life when he was with her.
Do you like being married to a very famous writer?
Yes. But I like being married to Hank most of all.
Good girl.
Is that okay, dear?
Yes, that was a nice answer. Yes. Okay.
Bukowski's final years on Earth were relatively mild. He finally achieved the middle-class status that he spent most of his life ranting and rebelling against. But Bukowski was quick to point out that even with success, no one ever escapes misery. In his poem entitled For the Concerned, he wrote, "For those readers now sick at heart, believing that I'm a contented man, please have some cheer. Agony sometimes changes form, but it never ceases for anybody."
I write the same thing over and over again. But you know, the terror is always there, man. The ugliness is always there. There's never any escape from anything at all. You're always going to be burned.
On March 9, 1994, Bukowski died of leukemia at 73 years old, with his wife Linda Lee by his side. In his lifetime, he produced a large, distinctive, widely beloved body of work, and changed modern American writing by bringing poetry to a street level where it could be read and enjoyed by the average man. He believed his purpose and everyone's purpose was to, quote, unlearn the teachings of the church, state, and our educational system. We are here to drink beer. We are here to kill war. We are here to laugh at the odds and live our lives so well that death will tremble to take us, end quote. Though he is now dead and gone, his work lives on. Today, people who weren't even born when he passed away read his books, retweet his verses, and watch videos like this one which are inspired by his writing. His poems are hymns for people that are disenfranchised and lonely, which is an increasing population in our now isolated internet world. Bukowski would be the last person to claim any higher purpose for his fiction. He said, quote, "My writing has no message, it has no moral aspect. I'm not so much a thinker as I am a photographer. I have nothing to prove or solve," end quote. Yet he still understood his impact. He told an interviewer, quote, "I get many letters in the mail about my writing, and they say, Bukowski, you are so fucked up and you still survive. I decided not to kill myself. So in a way, I save people. Not that I want to save them, I have no desire to save anybody. So these are my readers, you see. They buy my books, the defeated, the demented, and the damned, and I am proud of it," end quote. There's immense comfort in hearing someone describe the world the way it really is, even if it's bleak. You simply feel better that he was able to write it all down, and now you're not alone in your thoughts.
There is a loneliness in this world so great that you can see it in the slow movement of the hands of a clock. People so tired, mutilated, either by love or no love. People are just not good to each other, one-on-one. The rich are not good to the rich. The poor are not good to the poor. We are afraid. Our educational system tells us that we can all be big-ass winners. It hasn't told us about the gutters, or the suicides, or the terror of one person aching in one place alone. People are not good to each other. People are not good to each other. People are not good to each other. I suppose they never will be.
The author Ernest Hemingway was once asked to describe the best preparation for being a writer, and he responded, an unhappy childhood. If the best training is an unhappy childhood, then Bukowski's was first rate. His upbringing was scarred with physical and psychological abuse, but it created a man who channeled his pain into his writing. Sometimes it's not about processing your trauma, because thinking doesn't solve problems. Instead, it's about getting it out of your brain and into something. You have to take the frustrations, the loneliness, the trauma, the human void, and put it somewhere. And by doing that, it makes it feel like the trauma had a reason. And virtually anything provides an opportunity for growth. You wouldn't wish for it, you wouldn't want it to happen again, but there was something about it that made it worthwhile. And this is the story of Charles Bukowski. He bummed, he struggled, and he wrote, even when nobody was reading. He didn't get famous until he was in his 50s, but the many years he spent in the streets provided him endless material for his poetry, and that's the advantage of mature art. We live in a society ultra obsessed with youth, so these are typically the artists we see highlighted by the media, 20-something-year-olds that have overnight success. But to me, there's something much more special about an artist breaking through and finding success much later in life. Persistence is underrated. Again, Bukowski's first novel wasn't published until he was 50. Throughout his life, his work got rejected time and time again, but nothing stopped his commitment to writing. He just kept going, somehow, because he had to. Bukowski wrote, "During my worst times on the park benches, in the jails, or living with whores, I always had this certain contentment. I wouldn't call it happiness. It was more of an inner balance that settled for whatever was occurring, and it helped in the factories, and when relationships went wrong with the girls. It helped through the wars and the hangovers, the back alley fights, the hospitals. To awaken in a cheap room in a strange city and pull up the shade, this was the craziest kind of contentment. And to walk across the floor to an old dresser with a cracked mirror, see myself ugly, grinning at it all. What matters most is how well you walk through the fire."
Maxie, come here. Oh, baby, what is it?
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching the video. If you are interested in supporting my work, you can do so at patreon.com/JakeZeman. I actually just uploaded a video highlighting my process of making this documentary on Charles Bukowski. So it's a behind the scenes on how I edit, what my thought process is like. And I've also done this type of video for 2 other documentaries, the Supreme one and the Keith Haring doc. So check that out. You can get that video starting at $2 and it's a great way to support me. So for this video, I actually read 5 Bukowski books. So this was the longest research process that I've ever taken on for a video. The first book that I read is called You Get So Alone at Times That It Just Makes Sense. This is a book of Charles Bukowski poetry. This is my all-time favorite book. It's amazing. Highly, highly recommend this one. The other 4 are novels. This one is called Ham on Rye, all about his childhood. Factotum is about his early years bumming around the United States. This one's super fun. Post Office is about his years working at the post office and him kind of breaking his way into writing. And then the last one, this one's the most raunchy. It's called Women. This is after he got famous and him talking about his sexual escapades. So if you are interested in reading Bukowski, I put Amazon affiliate links in the bio. So if you purchase any of these books, I get a little bit of bounce back. I also want to announce the Soulr Instagram page. It's called soulr.co. Obviously, these documentaries take me a long time to make, so if you want to be tapped into the community, follow that page. We post every single day, and we do a weekly trivia that's really fun and also extremely difficult. If you want to follow my personal Instagram page, you can do so by searching for Jake Zeman. And also, if you are looking for new music, if you like the instrumentals in my documentaries, if you just like my taste, search for my Spotify by searching for my name, Jake Zeman. I have lots of different playlists on there, lots of different mood packs depending on what you're looking for. And my signature playlist is called Songs I'm Playing Right Now, which I update every single day. So thank you for watching the video. Thank you for supporting my channel. And I will see you next time, right, Free? Right? All right, see you guys.